Imagine this. 6 a.m. sharp on a freezing Tuesday. I'm in my bathrobe, steaming coffee burning my hand, staring out at my backyard as an HOA contractor's excavator tears into the cedar fence I poured 3 sweaty weekends building, board by board, post by post. The hydraulic arm screeches, wood snaps like gunshots echoing through the sleeping neighborhood. 40 minutes, that's all it took. My fence, gone, vanished. Right on my property line stands the HOA president, pearls clutched, lipstick-perfect smirk like she just won the lottery. She watches, silent, enjoying the destruction of something I built with my own hands. She never saw it coming. I don't cry to lawyers or wait months for nothing. I grab tools and build bigger, stronger, meaner. I turn their smug violation into a steel nightmare they couldn't drive through. What would you do if someone demolished your hard work and grinned in your face? Drop a comment. What's the craziest HOA horror you've dealt with? Where are you watching from? Let me back up about 4 years, because none of what happened in that driveway makes sense without knowing what my family built in Harlan County. And I don't mean just the house. My grandfather, Wendell Pruitt, bought the land in 1971. 2.5 acres on the outer edge of what was then an unincorporated stretch of central Tennessee, just far enough from Nashville that it felt like your own world. He put in the foundation himself, mixed concrete in a rented drum mixer, while Grandma Loretta handed him boards. The house was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch, a root cellar that still smells like clay and old apples. But it was theirs. And then it was my dad's. And then, 6 years ago, when Dad's knees finally gave out and he moved to assisted living in Clarksville, it became mine. I'm Garrett Pruitt. I'm 53 years old. I spent 22 years as a pipe fitter and the last 8 running a small welding fabrication shop out of a converted barn on the back of that property. I'm not a soft man, but I'm also not a confrontational one. I pay my bills, I keep my yard clean, I wave at neighbors. The neighborhood, though, it had changed. When the Sycamore Ridge HOA incorporated in 2018, it swallowed our little pocket of acreage into a broader subdivision framework as part of a county rezoning deal. I didn't vote for it. Barely anyone in the older section did. But our parcels got absorbed anyway, subject to a set of CC and Rs. That's covenants, conditions, and restrictions that had been written by a property management company called Vantage Community Solutions. You'll want to remember that name. The HOA board president was a woman named Constance Whitfield Drake. Constance had moved into Sycamore Ridge 4 years prior, into one of the new construction McMansions on the east side, the kind with stone veneer that's only a 1/4 inch thick and front yards that look like golf course renderings. She was maybe 55, immaculate in a way that suggested a lot of time and money spent maintaining the illusion of effortlessness. She served on the board of 2 local charities, attended every county planning meeting, and had the local code enforcement officer's personal cell number saved under Dennis, fast response. She had also, within 18 months of joining the board, quietly restructured the HOA's Architectural Review Committee so that she was the sole signature required for approval or denial of any exterior modification. I didn't know that last part yet. What I did know was the smell of fresh-cut cedar on a Saturday morning, that sharp, almost medicinal sweetness, and the satisfaction of driving a fence post into red Tennessee clay. My property line ran along a gravel service road on the south side, and over the years the HOA's landscaping contractors had started using that road to cut through to the newer section. Every time a truck rolled through, it chewed up the edge of my yard, threw gravel into my raised beds, and once, clipped the corner of my old chicken wire pen and scattered 6 hens across half an acre. So I built a cedar fence, 4 feet high, pressure-treated posts, good diagonal cross-bracing. I spent 3 weekends on it. My neighbor, an older retired machinist named Dolph Ferris, helped me set posts on the last day, and we finished it with a cold beer each, sitting on the tailgate of my truck while the evening light turned the wood orange. It was, genuinely, a fine fence. I submitted the architectural review form the following Monday. Constance denied it 11 days later. The reason listed: unapproved material, cedar not compliant with current community aesthetic standard. I appealed. She denied the appeal herself, because she could, and then she sent the contractor. The morning they tore it down, I made two decisions. The first was to document everything. The second was to not say a single word to Constance Whitfield Drake until I had something worth saying. I stood there on my porch in the early October chill. You could smell the first real frost coming, that dry metallic bite underneath the wood smoke from somebody's chimney up the road. And I filmed the whole thing on my phone, start to finish, 41 minutes of footage. You could hear the hydraulic arm groaning, the pop and splinter of posts, the gravel crunching under the contractor's boots. At one point, the crew chief kicked a broken post section off to the side, and it landed in my raised tomato bed, crushing what was left of a late-season Roma plant I'd been nursing along. The crew chief looked at it, looked at me, shrugged. I kept filming. Later that day, I drove to the county recorder's office and pulled every document on file for the Sycamore Ridge HOA, the original CC and RS, the Articles of Incorporation, the amendments filed since 2018. It cost me $14 in copying fees and about 2 hours of squinting at small print under fluorescent lights that flickered every 40 seconds like they were trying to communicate in Morse code. I also filed a property damage claim with the HOA's management company, Vantage Community Solutions, formally requesting reimbursement for the fence materials, $847.60, which I itemized to the penny. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. I kept the green card. Takeaway. In HOA disputes, every dollar of damage you document and formally claim becomes leverage, and certified mail with return receipt creates a legal paper trail that's surprisingly hard to ignore. Constance's response arrived 8 days later, a one-page letter on HOA letterhead informing me that the removal of the non-compliant structure had been authorized under Section 7.4 of the CC and Rs, that no reimbursement was owed, and that I should familiarize myself with the architectural review guidelines before undertaking any future exterior modifications. The letter was co-signed by 2 other board members, a man named Bradford Sutton, who owned 3 rental properties in the new section, and a retired schoolteacher named Miriam Goss, who I'd later learn had been trying to get off the board for a year, but couldn't find anyone to replace her. Now here's where it gets interesting, because while I was reading that letter at my kitchen table, Dolph Ferris knocked on my back door. He'd been doing some digging of his own, the kind of digging that happens when a 70-year-old retired machinist with a lot of time and a grudge starts asking questions at the county planning office. "You know that service road," he said, accepting a cup of coffee and settling into a chair like a man who'd been waiting to deliver good news. "The one the HOA contractors use to cut through your south end?" "Yeah. It's not a community easement." He slid a photocopied plat map across the table. "It's a private road. Always has been. Your granddaddy had a use agreement with the Beckford family going back to 1974, but that agreement expired when the last Beckford sold in 2009. He tapped the map. "Nobody ever filed a new easement. The HOA's been using that road for 6 years, with absolutely zero legal right to do so." I looked at the map for a long time. "So every contractor truck that drives through there is trespassing on your property," Dolph said, and took a sip of coffee. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call a lawyer yet. I didn't post anything online or knock on Constance's door. I just asked Dolph to write down everything he'd found, and I added it to the folder I was building. But I did do one thing. The next morning I measured the full width of that service road, drove to a farm supply store 2 counties over, and bought a roll of orange safety fencing, the cheap plastic kind that costs about 30 cents a foot, and some steel T-posts. I staked out a line across the south end of the road, just inside my property line, and hung a sign on it. Plain white poster board, black marker. "Private property, no trespass. Road use agreement expired 2009. Inquiries, Garrett Pruitt." Then I put my phone number on it. Constance called me within 4 hours, which was about 3 hours and 55 minutes faster than I expected. "That road is a community access route," she said. Her voice was the kind of controlled calm that costs a lot of energy to maintain. "Show me the easement," I said. Silence. "There isn't one," I said. "I'll wait while you look. Take your time." She hung up. I smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. Constance Whitfield Drake did not take setbacks quietly. That was something you learned about her fast. Within 48 hours of my phone call, she had done 3 things. She'd contacted the county code enforcement office, her friend Dennis, and filed a complaint that my T-post fencing was a safety hazard and non-compliant temporary structure. She'd called an emergency board meeting and pushed through a resolution declaring the service road a community thoroughfare by established use, essentially arguing that 6 years of unpermitted use had created a de facto easement. And she'd gone door to door in the new section, telling residents that the older property owner on the south boundary was deliberately blocking contractor access in a move that would delay the entire community's fall landscaping schedule. The smell of politics, cheap perfume over self-interest. Dennis from code enforcement showed up at my gate on a Thursday afternoon, clipboard in his hand and apology already written on his face. He was a thin man in his late 40s who looked like he'd spent years being uncomfortable in situations exactly like this one. "Mr. Pruitt," he said, "I've got a complaint on file about your temporary fencing. Is T-post and plastic safety fencing prohibited by county code?" I asked. He looked at his clipboard. "Well, for temporary structures under 30 days, I'll move it in 28 days, I said. "Or I'll replace it with something permanent. I haven't decided yet." He wrote something down. The complaint also references the road access issue. "Do you want a copy of the plat map showing no recorded easement?" I said. "I've got one right here." I handed it to him through the fence. Dennis looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. Then he wrote something else down and left without filing anything. That same week I did 2 things. The first was to call an attorney, a real property lawyer named Haskell Tran out of Murfreesboro, who a friend in the trades had used years earlier in a boundary dispute. I brought Haskell the plat map, the CC and Rs, the HOA's board resolution, and my full documentation folder. He spent about 40 minutes with it, and then leaned back in his chair. "Their established use argument is almost certainly going to fail," he said. "Adverse possession requires open, continuous, hostile use for 20 years in Tennessee. They've had 6. And it's not hostile because your family never objected, but that's also because nobody told you there was anything to object to." He paused. "You could file a trespass injunction and almost certainly win. But here's what I'd actually recommend first. Send a formal notice of the expired agreement and give them 60 days to either negotiate a legitimate easement or cease use. Let them make the next move. If they keep using the road after receiving that notice, every truck that crosses is a separate actionable trespass." Takeaway: a formal notice of expired license letter sent before filing suit resets the clock legally and forces the other party to either negotiate or expose themselves to escalating liability with every violation. We sent the letter. Certified mail again. Return receipt again. 2 copies, one to Constance, one to Vantage Community Solutions. Now, a reasonable person, a reasonable HOA board, would have called their property management company, gotten a real estate attorney on the phone, and started negotiating. Maybe offered to pay for a legitimate recorded easement, maybe apologized about the fence. Constance was not a reasonable person. She filed a civil complaint against me with the county, claiming that my T-post line was a deliberate interference with community operations, and she did an interview with the Sycamore Ridge Neighborhood Facebook group, a group I was not a member of and had not been invited to, in which she described me as a hostile legacy landowner attempting to hold the community hostage. Legacy landowner. Dolph read me that phrase over the phone, and it took me a moment to understand what I was actually feeling, which was a very cold, very clear anger. Not the hot kind. The kind that makes you careful. My family had been on that land for 53 years. Constance had been in her neighborhood for 4. And the phrase legacy landowner, delivered with that particular tone, in that particular community context, was doing something specific. It was drawing a line between the new Sycamore Ridge and the old one, between the stone veneer McMansions and my grandfather's concrete and lumber house, between people like her and people like me. I added the Facebook post to my documentation folder. Then I called my cousin Rayford, who runs a steel fabrication supplier in Dixon County. "How much would it cost," I asked, "to build something that would make a truck stop?" Rayford Pruitt is 6'4", speaks at half the speed of everyone around him, and has never in his life made a decision he regrets, because he never makes a decision fast. He came out to the property on a Saturday, walked the South Line 3 times, crouched down and dug his fingers into the clay soil to test the depth, and then stood up and said, "What are you thinking?" "Something permanent," I said. "Something legal. Something that doesn't need a permit because it qualifies as agricultural fencing under the state code." He nodded slowly. "Agricultural exemption. If you're keeping livestock." "I have chickens." He almost smiled. "How many?" "Enough." Under Tennessee State Agricultural Code, landowners who maintain livestock or crops are entitled to construct boundary fencing without standard residential permitting requirements, provided the structure serves a genuine agricultural function. The threshold is low. Even a small backyard flock qualifies. My 6 and then some hens, scattered and recollected after the contractor's last visit, were about to become load-bearing members of my legal strategy. Takeaway. In many states, agricultural fencing exemptions allow landowners to erect permanent boundary structures without HOA or municipal permits. Check your state's agricultural code before assuming you need approval. Rayford and I spent 2 hours sketching on a notepad at my kitchen table. What we came up with was not technically a fence. It was a series of steel bollards, 4-inch square tube, hot dip galvanized, set 3 feet deep in concrete footings, connected by horizontal steel rails at 2 heights, with a top rail at 4 feet and a secondary rail at 24 inches. The spacing between bollards was 22 inches, wide enough for a person to walk through, wide enough for a wheelbarrow, wide enough for my tractor with the mower deck removed, not wide enough for a pickup truck, absolutely not wide enough for a landscaping trailer. The entire structure would run 78 feet across the south end of the service road, exactly along my property line. It would be painted black. It would look, from a distance, like the kind of serious perimeter fencing you see around municipal utilities or commercial yards. It would be, in every legal sense, an agricultural boundary structure. And it would cost the HOA's contractors approximately $0 to avoid. All they had to do was stop trespassing on my land. Meanwhile, Constance was not idle. She had gotten clever, in the way that people get clever when they know they're losing the legal argument, but haven't accepted it yet. She began working the neighborhood's social architecture. She organized a community meeting, held at the clubhouse in the new section, to which I was sent a notification, but not a personal invitation, where she presented a PowerPoint presentation. I know this because Miriam Goss, the reluctant board member, called me afterward. "She had maps," Miriam said. Her voice had the tired quality of someone who'd been in a room with a bad smell for too long. "She's claiming your property is depressing neighborhood values." She showed comps. "She's talking about filing a nuisance complaint." "Miriam," I said, "what do you think about all this?" A long pause. "I think I've been trying to resign from this board for 14 months, and Constance keeps tabling my resignation letter." "She can't do that indefinitely," I said. "There's a process." "I know. I don't know what the process is." "I'll find out," I said. "And Miriam, if you're willing to talk to my attorney, it would help." Another pause. Then, "Yes, I think I am. I'll tell you something about Constance's mistake, and it's the same mistake every petty authority figure makes eventually. She treated everyone around her as either an asset or an obstacle, and she'd been so focused on me as the obstacle that she'd stopped paying attention to the assets. Miriam Goss had been on the board for 6 years. She had seen every vote, signed every document, attended every closed-door meeting. She had a memory like a steel trap, and a banker's box in her spare bedroom full of board minutes going back to 2019. I didn't know yet what was in that box, but around this time, a second thing was happening. My attorney Haskell had been doing some research on Vantage Community Solutions, the management company, that was turning up some interesting results. Results that had nothing to do with my fence or my service road or Constance's PowerPoint. Results that had to do with money. Haskell called me on a Wednesday evening while I was in the fabrication shop running a bead on a steel rail section. I cut the welder and pulled off my helmet, and even through the phone, I could hear the particular quality in his voice that lawyers get when they've found something good. "Tell me," I said. "Vantage Community Solutions," he said. I pulled their corporate filings and cross-referenced their management contracts across the county. They manage 11 HOAs in this area. In 4 of those HOAs, including yours, they have a contract clause that allows them to collect a vendor referral fee on any contractor work they source for the community. I waited. The fee is 12%, he said. Not disclosed in the CC and Rs, not disclosed in the management agreement that homeowners receive. Buried in the master services contract between the HOA board and Vantage, a contract that was signed by the three-person board majority, which at the time of signing was Constance Whitfield Drake, Bradford Sutton, and one prior member who since moved away. I set down my welding helmet. So, Vantage gets a cut every time they send a contractor. Every time. Landscaping, paving, fence removal, everything. And here's the part that gets better. The contractor who tore down your fence, Hargrove Site Services, they're listed as a preferred vendor in the Vantage network. Vantage collected a referral fee on that job, possibly on several jobs involving your property. Takeaway. Many HOA management companies embed undisclosed vendor referral fees into master contracts, a conflict of interest that may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, and in some states, fraud. In Tennessee, HOA board members owe a fiduciary duty to the homeowners they represent. That means they're legally required to act in the community's financial interest, not their own or their management companies. An undisclosed financial relationship between the management company and vendors, especially when that same management company is empowering a board president to unilaterally approve contractor work, is a textbook conflict of interest. In some circumstances, it rises to the level of civil fraud. Miriam's banker's box arrived at my house 2 days later. She drove it over herself, a small woman in her late 60s carrying a cardboard box with the focused energy of someone who had been waiting for permission to do the right thing. "Everything's in there," she said. "Board minutes, vote records, contract amendments. I kept copies of everything." She looked at me steadily. "Bradford Sutton knows about the referral fees. He's been on the board the whole time. I only found out 8 months ago, and when I tried to raise it at a board meeting, Constance adjourned the meeting before I finished the sentence." I shook her hand. "Miriam, you might have just changed everything." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm here." I stood at my kitchen table that night with Miriam's box spread out in front of me, cross-referencing dates and dollar amounts against the county's contractor permit records, which are public documents. The more I looked, the cleaner the picture got. 5 years of landscaping contracts, 4 paving projects, at least 2 structural removals, including mine, all routed through Vantage's preferred vendor network, all generating referral fees, none of it disclosed to the 312 homeowners who were paying HOA dues and trusting that their board was spending that money in good faith. The cedar fence they tore down cost me $847, but the fees they'd been collecting quietly, over 5 years, running through 11 HOAs, Haskell estimated the total exposure in our community alone at somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. I called Rayford and told him to order the steel. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in building something you know is going to work. Not the cocky satisfaction of a bet you think you're going to win. The deeper, quieter kind that comes from having measured twice, cut once, and filled in every gap. The bollard project took 3 weekends. Rayford brought 2 of his guys from the fabrication yard, men named Cecil and Tuck, who arrived at 7 a.m. both Saturdays with thermoses of black coffee, and the unhurried efficiency of people who've been doing physical work their whole lives. You could smell the morning damp in the clay as we drove the first auger hole, that rich mineral smell of disturbed earth, and the steel rang against the auger with a clean, bell-like tone every time we hit a rock pocket. We set 11 bollards. Each one dropped 3 feet into a concrete footing. I ordered high early strength mix, which sets harder faster and tolerates the Tennessee freeze-thaw cycle. Each bollard was 4-inch square tube, 11-gauge wall, hot dip galvanized, and then painted gloss black with industrial enamel. Rayford had water jet cut the top caps himself. They were clean and flat and professional looking, the way good fabrication always looks, like it was made to be there. The horizontal rails connected each bollard at 2 heights and were welded in place with full penetration butt welds. Not tack welds, not plug welds, but proper structural joints. The kind that don't come apart when a 6-ton landscaping truck decides to test them. I'm not saying I plan for someone to drive into them. I'm saying that if someone drove into them, I wanted the truck to lose. Between each pair of bollards we hung a simple chain, galvanized, 3/8 inch, rated at 4 tons braking strength. because the chains made it look friendly and agricultural, which it legally was, and because chains are removable if I decide later to run my tractor through for some purpose. The whole installation ran $3,400 in materials. Rayford cut me a deal on labor. It was, by any measure, the best $3,400 I'd ever spent. While the concrete cured, I was working on 3 other fronts. Haskell had assembled a formal demand letter to Vantage Community Solutions and the HOA board, outlining the undisclosed referral fee structure and demanding a full accounting of all vendor fees collected since 2019, restitution to the homeowner fund, and the immediate removal of Constance Whitfield Drake and Bradford Sutton from the board, pending an independent audit. The letter cited Tennessee Code Annotated Section 66-27-504, which governs HOA fiduciary duties, and Section 39-14-146, the Civil Theft Statute, which applies when funds are obtained by deception. Takeaway: in Tennessee and most states, HOA board members can face personal civil liability, not just organizational liability, for financial self-dealing. That means their personal assets are potentially at risk, not just the HOA's. Miriam, now acting with the energy of someone who'd been storing it for years, had quietly reached out to 8 other homeowners in the older section, people who'd been in Sycamore Ridge since before the HOA incorporation, who had their own complaints, their own documentation, their own cold grievances about fence denials and landscaping charges and meeting boats that happened with no notice. She organized them into something she called, without fanfare, the Sycamore Ridge Property Owners Coalition. They met at her dining room table and drank decaf and compared notes. One of the homeowners, a retired civil engineer named Stu Hardwick, had filed his own architectural complaint 2 years prior and kept every piece of correspondence. Another, a woman named Darla Ferris, Dolph's daughter-in-law, it turned out, had a background in nonprofit accounting and recognized immediately what the referral fee structure was. "That's a kickback scheme," Darla said, looking at the numbers. "That's not a gray area." Meanwhile, I started making calls to 2 other places: the Tennessee Real Estate Commission, which licenses HOA management companies, and the County DA's Consumer Protection Division. I wasn't filing complaints yet. I was asking questions, laying groundwork, finding out what the process looked like, who the right contacts were, what documentation they'd want. And I called the Clarksville Gazette, not to complain, just to let them know that in about 3 weeks, there might be a story worth covering in Sycamore Ridge. The reporter who answered was 26 years old and sounded bored. She stopped sounding bored after about 4 minutes. I also did one last thing. I installed a trail camera on a fence post overlooking the South Road. Weatherproof housing, motion activated, transmitting to my phone. Because sometimes the best trap is just a camera and a bad actor who doesn't know it's there. The concrete set over the following week. On a Thursday morning, I pulled the orange safety fencing. The black steel wall stood in the early light like it had always been there. The first truck hit the bollards on a Monday. Not hard. The driver slowed in time, probably expecting the cheap plastic fencing he'd been driving past for weeks. I watched the whole thing on my phone from my shop. The trail camera caught it in crisp 1080p. A white pickup with a Hargrove Site Services magnetic door panel rolled down the service road at about 15 miles an hour. Brake lights flared at 30 feet, and the truck stopped 6 inches from the front rail, close enough that the driver could probably read the sign I'd mounted on the center bollard. The sign said, "Private property, no recorded easement, trespass by vehicle, TCA, Section 39-14-405. Report to H-Tran ESQ 615 number." The driver sat there for about 2 minutes, then backed up and left. I sent the clip to Haskell with the timestamp. He replied, "Perfect, keep collecting." Constance's response to the bollards arrived not through proper channels, but through the neighborhood Facebook group, where she posted a photograph of the installation with the caption, "This is what one resident's hostility looks like. Our contractors cannot access the south route. Fall aeration and overseeding will be delayed for the entire community because of one person's vendetta. This is not what Sycamore Ridge stands for." The post got 47 comments. About 30 of them were sympathetic to her, but 17 were from older section residents who had started asking questions about fees, about the audit, about the board meeting that Miriam said had been adjourned improperly. The cracks were showing. Then Constance made her biggest mistake yet. She hired someone. I don't know exactly who he was, a private investigator or someone playing at it. But starting that Wednesday, a silver sedan began appearing on the street near my property at odd hours, sitting. My trail camera caught it twice. My neighbor across the road, a retired sheriff's deputy named Orville Beck, noticed it once and wrote down the plate number out of habit. That's not somebody visiting anybody on this street, Orville told me. Nobody parks like that unless they're watching. I added the plate to my folder. More pressingly, someone had been talking to Bradford Sutton. Haskell called me midweek to report that Vantage's attorney had reached out, not to negotiate, but to threaten. The letter accused me of interfering with community operations, defamation per se, for sharing financial documents with other homeowners, and tortious interference with business relations, for allegedly discouraging Hargrove Site Services from continuing their contract. Haskell laughed when he read me the tortious interference claim. "They're scared," he said. "This is a letter you write when you don't have a defense." But scared people do reckless things, and the reckless thing came on a Friday night. I came out Saturday morning to find that someone had spray painted across 2 of my bollards in red paint. "Remove this now," and scratched something unintelligible into the enamel on a 3rd. The trail camera had been triggered, but the angle had been partially blocked. I could see a figure in dark clothing, not much else. I called Orville, who called a former colleague at the county sheriff's office, who agreed to take a vandalism report. Photographs were taken. The scratched steel glittered in the morning light. You could smell the spray paint still, acrid and petrochemical, out of place in the cold morning air. I cleaned the paint off with lacquer thinner. It came off the galvanized surface cleanly, and filed the report. Then I spent 2 hours that Saturday repositioning my trail cameras and adding a second unit with a wider field of view, both of them now transmitting to a cloud backup, as well as my phone. Then I called the Clarksville Gazette reporter back. Her name was Tess Odom, and I had been talking to her in general terms for 3 weeks. Now, I told her, "I think we're getting close." She asked if she could be present when things came to a head. "I'll let you know the date," I said. Meanwhile, Miriam had been doing something I didn't know about yet, something patient and important. She had been calling homeowners in the new section. Not the vocal Constance supporters, but the quiet ones. The ones who'd bought their houses in good faith and paid their dues, and just wanted things to work properly. She'd been having kitchen table conversations, the kind that don't show up in Facebook posts. She'd been showing people the numbers. The coalition was growing. 3 days before the HOA's annual general meeting, the one meeting per year where all homeowners had a vote, where board terms could be challenged and officers removed, Constance made her move. She called a special informational session for the new section only, scheduled for the evening before the general meeting at the clubhouse. The stated purpose was to address recent disruptions to community services and hear from residents. I was not invited. The older section residents were not notified. It was, structurally, a rally, a way to consolidate her base before the real vote, to frame the narrative, to make sure that when 300 homeowners sat down together the next evening, her version of events was the one they'd heard most recently. I found out about it because Miriam was on the notification list. "I'm going," she told me. "So am I," said Darla. "Me too," said Stu Hardwick, who showed up to things with a legal pad and a mechanical pencil, and the air of a man who has attended many meetings and ruined several of them with inconvenient facts. What Constance had not planned for was that the new section-only session was being held in a clubhouse that was, as a matter of HOA bylaws, a common facility available to all dues-paying members. You couldn't legally exclude homeowners from a meeting held on common property. Miriam had confirmed this with Haskell. He'd confirmed it in writing. So when Miriam, Darla, Stu, and 4 other coalition members walked into the clubhouse at 6:58 p.m. and sat down in the back row, Constance stared at them for a long moment from the front of the room. Then she smiled the specific smile of a person recalculating very quickly. The session went poorly for her. Not explosively, not yet. But Stu raised his hand during the Q&A and asked, in his careful engineering voice, whether Constance could explain the mechanism by which a community management company earned revenue from vendor contracts. The room got quiet. Constance said it wasn't relevant to the meeting's purpose. Stu said he thought it was quite relevant, given that the management company's vendor referral fees appeared to represent a conflict of interest that had not been disclosed to homeowners. 3 people in the new section, 3 people who had been sitting there as Constance supporters, who had come to this meeting fully intending to nod along, started looking at each other with the expression of people hearing something for the first time that they probably should have heard sooner. The meeting ended abruptly. Constance did not take further questions. In my fabrication shop that night, I finished a project I'd been working on quietly for 2 weeks. It was a display board, 4 feet by 3 feet, foam core mounted, the kind of thing you'd see at a science fair or a small business presentation. On it, I'd organized the key documents, the plat map with the expired use agreement highlighted, the HOA's vendor contract with the referral fee clause marked, the dollar figures from Darla's accounting analysis, the timeline of events, including the fence removal, the vandalism report, and the trail camera stills. Clean, clear, simple, the kind of thing you could read in 3 minutes and understand completely. I also had Haskell's formal demand letter, now updated to reflect an additional month of documented trespass incidents. 7 total truck crossings captured on camera after the notice of the expired easement had been served. 7 separate actionable trespasses, each one logged with timestamp and vehicle identification. Tess Odom called me that night. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, I said. Orville Beck stopped by in the evening to tell me he'd had the silver sedan's plate run through a contact. It came back registered to a business, a background investigation firm with no listed employees, and a P.O. box address in Brentwood, the kind of thing that exists on paper. "You want me to come tomorrow?" Orville asked. He was 61, gray-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who'd spent decades reading rooms. Moral support. "I'd appreciate it," I said. That night I slept well for the first time in months. There's something about having done everything right, every step documented, every legal avenue covered, every ally in position, that produces a genuine calm. Not the calm of someone who's given up, the calm of someone who's finished building. Outside, in the dark, the bollards stood in a straight black line across the South Road. Solid, galvanized, waiting. The annual meeting was at 7 p.m. the next day. I got there at 6:30. The Sycamore Ridge HOA annual general meeting was held in the community center attached to the clubhouse, a low-slung beige building with fluorescent lights and stackable chairs arranged in rows. By 6:45, the room held about 90 people, which was more than double the usual attendance. Word had gotten around, even in the news section, even among people who'd been taking Constance's Facebook posts at face value. People sensed that something was happening. I set up my display board on an easel near the front, to the right of the podium. Constance, who arrived at 6:50, saw it immediately. She walked over to me with Bradford Sutton half a step behind her. "That's not approved agenda material," she said. "There's an open comment period in the bylaws," I said. Section 4.7. Every member has 5 minutes. She looked at the board, at the highlighted documents, at the dollar figures. Her expression went through 3 or 4 things in rapid sequence and settled on controlled hostility. "This is harassment. This is a community meeting," I said. She walked away. Bradford Sutton lingered for a moment, looking at the financial summary Darla had prepared. He was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s, with the residual confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in low-stakes rooms. Looking at the board, he had the expression of a man suddenly unsure which room he was in. Tess Odom from the Gazette was sitting in the second-to-last row, press badge on a lanyard, notebook open. Next to her was a photographer. I had not told Constance the press would be there. I had also not told Constance that I had emailed the Tennessee Real Estate Commission's complaint hotline 3 days prior with a complete documentation packet, or that TREC had sent a response indicating they were opening a preliminary review of Vantage Community Solutions. The meeting opened with Constance calling the session to order. She moved through the agenda items with the brisk efficiency of someone trying to finish before the building catches fire. She didn't make it. During old business, Stu Hardwick moved to table the landscaping contract renewal, a $47,000 annual agreement with Hargrove Site Services, pending a full audit of all vendor fees paid to or through Vantage Community Solutions. He had seconded by Miriam before Constance finished drawing breath to object. Under Robert's Rules of Order, a motion to table requires a majority vote. Constance called the vote, and it passed 51 to 38, with almost all the split coming from new section homeowners who'd been at the previous night's meeting. The room shifted. You could feel it, the particular social gravity change when an authority figure loses a procedural vote in front of a crowd. Constance's face didn't move, but something behind it did. Then came open comment. I walked to the podium with my display board and 5 minutes on the clock and gave what I'd describe as the clearest presentation I've ever delivered. I walked through the expired easement. I walked through the fence removal. I walked through the undisclosed referral fees, $53,400 over 5 years in our community alone, based on Darla's analysis of what the documents could confirm, with additional amounts potentially unaccounted for. I named the statute. I referenced the TREC complaint. I pointed out that the demand letter had been served, that the deadline for response had passed without substantive reply, and that as of the following week, Haskell would be filing a civil complaint. Then I showed the trail camera stills, 7 trucks, 7 timestamps, 7 documented trespasses after formal legal notice. Every one of these, I said, is a separate cause of action. I'm not telling you this to threaten anyone. I'm telling you this because you are members of this community, and you have a right to know what's been done in your name, with your money. The room was very quiet. Constance stood up before I finished. This is completely... Mrs. Whitfield Drake, said a man in the third row, someone I didn't know, a newer resident with 2 kids who'd been sitting with his arms crossed. Please let him finish. She sat down. When I finished, I walked back to my chair. Tess Odom was writing fast. The photographer had been shooting since I stood up. Bradford Sutton resigned from the board 40 minutes later, during the board officer election segment, citing personal scheduling conflicts. Miriam nominated Darla Ferris for the vacated seat. The vote wasn't close. Constance did not resign. She sat through the rest of the meeting with the rigid composure of someone who has decided to treat a sinking ship like a piece of solid ground. She did not speak again. 3 days later, she did resign, by email, with no explanation, effective immediately. The bollards are still there. Here's what happened over the following 6 months, because the story doesn't end at the meeting. It just gets quieter, and in a lot of ways, better. Haskell filed the civil complaint in County Circuit Court. Vantage Community Solutions, faced with the TREC review and the prospect of litigation in multiple HOA communities. Our complaint had prompted 3 other communities to pull their own records, settled within 90 days. The settlement terms are confidential, but I can tell you this. The Sycamore Ridge Homeowner Fund received a payment that covered, at minimum, a substantial portion of the undisclosed fees collected over 5 years. The new board, Miriam as interim president, Darla as treasurer, Stu as architectural review chair, voted to use a portion of those funds to reduce HOA dues by 15% for 2 consecutive years. 312 homeowners got a check equivalent in the form of a dues reduction. Because of a cedar fence, Hargrove Site Services quietly dropped Sycamore Ridge from their client list and stopped using the service road. The 7 trespass actions were ultimately not pursued individually. Haskell folded them into the larger settlement as leverage, which served the same purpose more efficiently. The new board and I negotiated a legitimate recorded easement for the road, in exchange for a nominal annual fee that goes toward road maintenance. It's all in the county records now, exactly where it should have been in 2018. The bollards stayed. They look good, actually. Rayford came back out and welded a simple, decorative cap rail on the top, and I planted a row of native switchgrass along the south side of the fence line that's already coming in thick. In spring, it'll be 4 feet tall, and move in the wind and look like it was always supposed to be there. My property damage claim, the original $847.60 for the cedar fence, was paid in full, with interest, as part of the settlement. I framed the check. It's hanging in the shop next to my welding certifications. Dolph Ferris told me, over a beer on my tailgate one evening in April, that this was the most interesting thing to happen in this neighborhood since 1987. When a dispute over a shared well ended with someone's tractor in a drainage ditch. I chose to take that as a compliment. Constance Whitfield Drake, as far as I know, has not attended a community event since her resignation. The TREC review is ongoing, and not something I can speak to in detail. Whatever happens with that is between her, Vantage, and the state of Tennessee. I don't spend a lot of energy thinking about her. What I think about instead is the thing the new board decided to do with a remaining portion of the settlement funds. The amount above and beyond the dues reduction. After a community-wide vote, they established the Sycamore Ridge Neighborhood Scholarship Fund, endowed at $15,000, awarding annual college scholarships to graduating seniors from the local high school district. The first two recipients were announced in May: a girl from the north side of the county who wants to study civil engineering, and a kid from 2 streets over who's headed to a trade school for electrical work. The Sycamore Ridge Board also voted to hold an annual community festival, a proper one, not a HOA organized branding event, but a block party-style cookout with food and music, and a swap table for neighbors who want to give away or trade things. The first one was last June. I brought a slow cooker of chili, and Dolph brought a jar of honey from his daughter's bees, and Miriam Goss looked, for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely relaxed. It was a good evening. The air smelled like charcoal and cut grass, and the particular sweetness of Tennessee in early summer, and the neighborhood felt, for a few hours, like a neighborhood. My grandfather built his house on that land because he believed in the permanence of what you build with your own hands. I think he was right. It just turns out that some of what you build is made of cedar, and some of it is made of steel, and some of it, the best of it, is made of people who finally decided to show up.
You know what I keep coming back to? Not the steel word, not the settlement check, the hydraulical crack, crack, crack. 41 minutes, 3 weekends of one man's life gone. And she stood there smiling like she won something. Here's the thing about pet power. It never looks dangerous at first. It looks like a signature line on a review form. It looks like the woman with one committee seat deciding your seat offense, her sensibilities. Small was laughable until the machine showed up at 6 a.m. Garrett didn't win because he's lucky. He won because he understood something most people don't: the patient documentation. It angled every single time. $53,000 in undisclosed vendor fees, 7 tree passes on camera, every certificate of the cap, every green card said. The house his grandfather built in 1971 is still standing. The ballers are still there, and the customs resides by email. 3 days later, no explanation. If you're living under an HOA right now, do you actually know where your dues go? Most people don't. Most management companies are cutting on that. Drop the story in the comments. I read everyone. If this hits close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because the next one is heavier than this. They can tear down your fence, but they can't tear down the man who built it.